Chapter 12. Just as Selena was about to launch herself and her knives at the captain, someone stomped a spear on the ground and called the room to attention. She faced the voice and found a stocky, balding man standing beneath the mezzanine. "Your attention now," the man repeated. Selena looked to Kale, who nodded, taking the knives from her as they joined the 23 other competitors encircling the man. "I am Theodius Brulo, weapons master and judge of this competition. Of course, our king's the final judge of you sorry lot, but I'll be the one determining every day if you're fit to be his champion." He patted his sword hilt, and Selena had to admire the beautiful woven gold of the pommel. "I've been weapons master here for 30 years and lived in this castle for 25 more than that. I've trained many a lord and knight and many a would-be champion of Ardalan. It will be very hard to impress me." Beside Selena, Kale stood with his shoulders thrown back. It occurred to her that Brullo might have trained the captain. Given how easily Kale had kept up with her, if Brullo had trained him, then the weapons master must live up to his title. She knew better than anyone not to underestimate opponents based on their appearance. "The king's already told you all there is to know about this competition," Brullo said, holding his hands behind his back. "But I figured you lot are itching to know more about each other." He pointed a stubby finger at Kane. "You, what's your name, occupation, and where do you hail from? And be honest about it. I know none of you are bakers and candlestick makers." Kane's insufferable grin returned. "Kane, soldier in the king's army. I hail from the White Fang Mountains." Of course he did. She heard tales of the brutality of the mountain folk from that region, and seen a few of them up close, seen the fierceness in their eyes. Many of them had rebelled against Ardalan, and most wound up dead. What would his fellow mountain dwellers say if they could see him now? She gritted her teeth. What would the people of Terrason say if they could see her now? Brillo, however, didn't know or didn't care, and didn't even give a nod before he pointed to the man to Kane's right. Selena immediately liked him. "And you?" A slender, tall man with thinning blonde hair surveyed the circle and sneered. "Xavier Farrell, master thief of Melisande." Master thief? That man? Of course she realized his reed thinness probably aided into slipping into houses. Maybe it wasn't a bluff. One by one, the 21 other competitors introduced themselves. There were 6 more seasoned soldiers, all of them thrown out of the army for questionable behavior, which must have been truly questionable given that Ardalan's army was notorious for ruthlessness. Then there were 3 other thieves, including the dark-haired, grey-eyed Knox Owen, whom she'd actually heard in passing, and who'd been giving her such charming smiles all morning. The 3 other mercenaries looked ready to boil someone alive, and then there were 2 shackled murderers. As his name suggested, Bill Chastain, the Eye-Eater, ate the eyes of his victims. He looked surprisingly plain, with mousy brown hair, tan skin, and average height, though Selena had trouble not staring at his scar-flecked mouth. The other murderer was Ned Clement, who had gone for 3 years under the name Scythe for the weapon he'd used to torture and hack apart temple priestesses. It was a wonder they hadn't executed either man, though from their tan skin, she'd guessed they'd spent the years since their captures toiling under the sun in Kalakala, their southern sister labour camp to Endovia. Next came 2 scarred, silent men who seemed to be cronies of some far-off warlord, and then the 5 assassins. She immediately forgot the names of the first 4, a gangly, haughty boy, a hulking brute, a disdainful runt of a man, and a snivelly, hawk-nosed prat who claimed he had infinity for knives. They weren't even in the Assassin's Guild, not that Arab and Hamel would even allow them in. Membership required years of training and a more than impressive track record. Whilst these 4 might be skilled, they lacked the refinement that Arabin favoured in his followers. She'd have to keep an eye on them, but at least they weren't the silent assassins from the windswept dunes of the Red Desert. Those would be worthy of her. They'd make her sweat a bit. She had spent a month training with them one burning summer, and her muscles still ached at the memory of their grueling exercises. The last assassin, who called himself Grave, made her pause. He was slight and short, with a kind of wicked face that made people quickly look away. He'd entered the room wearing shackles and only had them removed when his guards, all 5 of them, gave a stern warning. Even now, they stood nearby watching him relentlessly. As he introduced himself, Grave flashed an oily smile, revealing his brown teeth. Her disgust didn't improve when Grave ran an eye over her body. An assassin like that never stopped at just killing. Not if his victim was female. She willed herself to hold his hungry gaze. "And you?" Brolo said, cutting into her thoughts. "Lillian Gordana," she said, holding her chin high. "Jewel thief from Belhaven." Some of the men sniggered, and she clenched her teeth. They'd stop laughing if they knew her true name, if they knew that this jewel thief could skin them alive without a knife. "Fine," Brule said, waving a hand. "You all have 5 minutes to put away your weapons and catch your breath. And then we're going on a mandatory run to see how fit you are. Those of you who can't run the distance, go home, or back to whatever prison your sponsors found you rotting in. Your first test is in 5 days. Consider us merciful, it is not sooner." With that, everyone scattered, the champions murmuring to their trainers about whatever competitor they deemed the biggest threat. Kane or Grave, most likely. Certainly not a jewel thief from Belhaven. Kale remained beside her, watching the champion stride off. She hadn't spent 8 years building a reputation and a year labouring in Endovia to be disregarded like this. "If I have to call myself a jewel thief again," Kale raised his brows, "you'll do what, exactly?" "Do you know how insulting it is to pretend to be some nobody thief from a small city in Fenharrow?" He stared her down, quiet for a moment. "Are you that arrogant?" She bristled, but he went on. "It was foolish to spar with you just now. I'll admit I hadn't realised you'd be that good. Thankfully, no one noticed. And do you want to know why, Lillian?" He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Because you're some pretty little girl. Because you're a nobody jewel thief from a small city in Fenharrow. Look around." He half turned to the other champions. "Is anyone staring at you? Are any of them sizing you up? No, because you're not real competition. Because you don't stand between them and whatever freedom or wealth they're looking for." "Exactly. It's insulting." "It is smart. That's what it is. And you're going to keep a low profile throughout this entire competition. You're not going to excel. And you're not going to trounce those thieves and soldiers and unknown assassins. You're going to stay solidly in the middle where no one will look your way because you're not a threat, because they'll think you'll be eliminated sooner or later and they should focus their attention on getting rid of bigger, stronger, faster champions like Kane. But you're going to outlast them," Cal continued. "And when they wake up on the morning of the final duel and find that you are their opponent and that you have been to them, the look on their faces will make all the insults and lack of attention worthwhile." He extended his hand to lead her outside. "So, what do you have to say about that, Lillian Gordana?" "I can look out for myself," she said lightly, taking his hand. "But I have to say you're rather brilliant, Captain. So brilliant, actually, that I might give you one of the jewels I plan to steal from the Queen tonight." Kale chuckled, and they strolled outside to where the running contest awaited. Her lungs burned, and her legs were leaden, but she kept running, kept her position in the middle of the pack of champions. Brullo, Kale, and the other trainers, along with 3 dozen armed guards, followed them around the game park on horseback. Some of the champions, Grave, Ned, and Bill included, had been given long manacles. She supposed it was a privilege that Cal hadn't locked her up to, but to her surprise, Kane led the pack and was nearly 10 yards in front of the rest of them. How could it be possibly that fast? The sound of crunching leaves and laboured breathing filled the warm autumn air, and Selena kept her gaze on the damp and gleaming dark hair of the thief in front of her. One step after another, one breath in, one breath out. Breathe. She had to remember to keep breathing. Ahead, Cain turned a corner, leading north, back toward the castle. Like a flock of birds, they followed him, one step after another, never slowing down. Let them all watch Cain. Let them plot against him. She didn't need to win the race to prove she was better. She was better without any kind of validation that the king could give her. She missed a breath and her knees wobbled, but she kept upright. The run would be over soon. Soon. She hadn't even dared look behind her to see if any had fallen. She could feel Cal's eyes on her, though, reminding her to keep in the middle. At least he had that much faith in her. Trees parted, revealing the field that lay between the game park and the stables, the end of the path. Her head spun, and she would have cursed at the stitch that lanced through her side had she had any breath to do so. She had to stay in the middle. Stay in the middle. Cain cleared the trees and raised his arms above his head in victory. He ran a few more feet, slowing his pace to cool down, and his trainer cheered for him. Selena's only response was to keep her feet moving. Only a few yards left. The sight of the open field growing brighter and brighter as it approached. Stars flashed before her eyes, swarming in her vision. She had to stay in the middle. Years of training with Arab and Hamel had taught her the dangers of giving up too easily. Then she was through the trees, and the open field surrounded her in an explosion of space and grass and blue sky. The man in front of her slowed to a stop. It was all she could do to keep from sinking to her knees, but she made her legs slow, made her feet walk, made herself take a breath after breath as the stars continued bursting before her eyes. Good, Brillo said, reining his horse and surveying whoever had first returned. Get water? We've got more training to do after this. Through the spots in her vision, she saw Cal stop his horse. Her feet moved on their own accord toward him, then passed, back to the woods. Where are you going? I dropped my ring back there, she lied, doing her best to look scatterbrained. Just give me a moment to find it. Without waiting for his approval, she entered the trees to the sneers and snickers of the champions who had overheard. From the approaching crashing noises, she knew another champion was on his way out. She stepped into the cover of the bushes, stumbling as the world became dark and light and tilted. She had barely sunk to her knees when she vomited. She heaved and heaved until she had nothing left inside. The straggling champion passed by. On trembling limbs, she grappled onto a nearby tree and hauled herself upright again. She found Captain Westfold standing across the path, watching her with pursed lips. She wiped her mouth on the back of her wrist and said nothing to him as she exited the woods.